Hello and welcome to this video overview and demonstration of FireMon's Risk Analyzer module. It goes without saying that any company's network security posture is extremely important, especially with today's fast-paced, complex attack scenarios. Regardless of size and infrastructure, staying on top of security risks in a company is quite a chore, with challenges such as the following. Network complexity creates a lack of visibility into current risk exposure. Business requests for network access, which lead to configurations without risk analysis. Too few resources are available to remediate security incidents. And the inability to quantify, justify, or forecast security spending. The consequences are many, such as outages that lead to loss of revenue and reduced business productivity, data loss, tarnished reputation, and breaches into the network. Skilled employees will be focused on low-value operational tasks and lack of budget and/or unplanned security expenditures. The list goes on and on. Once again, FireMon is here to help. Our Risk Analyzer module can help by overlaying vulnerability data on network security configurations to identify contextual risk. In other words, we import known vulnerability data to the system and then scan your network to identify which security rules or even devices are considered exploitable. The application also aids in prioritizing risk mitigation by using scores according to the vulnerabilities that are either allowed through the firewall rules or exploited on assets. FireMon then enables the measurement of trends in your security posture as it improves or otherwise using these scores. What does this do for you, the customer? It allows you to have resources that are proactively focused on risk remediation activities. It gives real-time visibility into all network security changes and gives data-driven insight into security metrics and trends. This all provides measurably improved security posture and provides appropriate, relevant, risk-assessed network access to the business to ensure the policies that are being implemented meet the security standards in place. And it provides rapid remediation when risks are identified. Finally, a company's skilled resources will be able to focus more on high-impact projects instead of low-end tasks. There are two prerequisites for accessing Risk Analyzer. You must first have permission granted to access the device group you want to analyze, and then you must also have a license for Risk Analyzer for your Security Intelligence Platform domain. Once these two things are in place, we will look at setting up the Risk Analyzer module to enable the import of vulnerability data. Our first step will be to configure the vulnerability data source, which is the connection to the list of CVEs or common vulnerabilities and exposures from the National Vulnerability Database or NVD. This can be done one of two ways: by reaching out to a known vulnerability database website such as the default entry of nvd.nist.gov, or we can import vulnerability files from a trusted vulnerability source such as NIST. Once we have the vulnerability definitions imported, we move to the scan data source configurations. These configurations pertain to the scan data provider used by your company, such as Tenable or QualisGuard. This is the data Risk Analyzer uses to detect vulnerabilities within your network. Next, we'll want to schedule automatic retrievals to ensure our data is up to date. There are a couple details to remember when configuring Risk Analyzer. The first being that the FireMon server will be communicating directly with the scan device. So if there is not a trusted certificate installed on both, the communication will not work. The second point is that the imports could take some time to complete, so expect to let it run for a while. When both the CVE data source and scan data source information are imported, we can access the information by going to the Security Manager page, click the Risk Analyzer drop-down, and select the dashboard. Here we will see the KPIs across the top of the screen, including the total number of assets, and how many of those assets were found with vulnerabilities, the total number of vulnerabilities found along with the number of critical vulnerabilities, And by the way, critical vulnerabilities are those that would give an attacker administrator-level privileges on a target. We also see the vulnerability density, which is the ratio of the total vulnerabilities to the total number of assets, and then the date of the last successful scan data import for the device group. The widgets down below are intuitively titled informational views that keep track of risk trends, the riskiest assets on the network, common vulnerabilities, and the 10 riskiest rules across the normalized policies. Just like the Security Manager dashboard, you can click on several links that can take you to the relevant sections in Security Manager. For example, if we click on the assets with vulnerabilities, we will see a list of all the assets as reported. If we click on one of the riskiest assets, we are taken to the Risk Analyzer page that lists the vulnerabilities affecting that device. And if we click on one of the riskiest rules, we are taken to the informational page for that specific rule. We can also look at the Risk Analyzer dropdown and see options to view the lists of assets or vulnerabilities as well as the risk map. Let's start with the assets list. This list looks much like our list of devices in Security Manager, except that it includes all the assets reachable by the scan data source. So notice that the list includes much more than just the security devices on the network. You also have the ability to search using filter bricks for specific devices or groups of devices that meet certain criteria, such as those devices that have root-level vulnerabilities. The columns in this view are, of course, the asset name and IP address, the value assigned to the devices, which is imported from the scan data source, and the asset risk score, which is the level of risk for the asset relative to the other assets in the device group. Finally, we see the different types of vulnerabilities found on each device categorized as root, user, DOS, and other, and then the total number of vulnerabilities on each device. Now let's look at the list of vulnerabilities. This, of course, is a list of the many different vulnerabilities found on the network, but keep in mind it is not the full list of vulnerabilities overlain on top of the security infrastructure. We will see that some of these vulnerabilities are listed more than once as they exist on more than one device. In this case, we are looking at 5,648 results. We see the vulnerability name, a useful description, the affected asset name and IP address, service, the effect, which is the level of access an attacker would have, and then the different levels of access are root, which allows the attacker administrator level privilege on the target asset. There's user, which allows guest or user level privileges. Denial of service, which allows the attacker to prevent a service on the target asset or the entire system from functioning properly. And other, which occurs when some level of confidentiality or integrity loss occurs without direct access to the system. Next are the locality, or where an attacker can be located to exploit the vulnerability, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS, which is a score assigned to each, and when the vulnerabilities were published. The last option in the Risk Analyzer drop-down menu is the Risk Map. This map view is dependent on whether the topology has been correctly configured in the Security Manager. Here we can click on any one of the devices on the map and simulate an attack. Imagine if I'm an attacker and I was able to infiltrate one of the assets on the network, then the next step would be to infiltrate the rest of the network. Therefore, I would need to find out what paths I could take to navigate the network and steal information or cause as much damage as possible. In this case, I'll start an attack from the 192.168.202.0/23 network. And in this case, there are 3 attack paths, numbered in the order that Risk Analyzer says these risks should be prioritized. Additionally, the circular path is showing that an attacker would be able to pivot through the network segment and exploit more than one asset. Notice also the color of the paths match the vulnerability levels, where red is root, orange is user, yellow is DOS, and green is other. In the results pane, we can see the overall risk score for our scanned network. Below that is the recommended patches that we can apply to remediate the risk. We can get a more granular view if we click on the arrow next to the patch checkbox and see what services are posing the risks for each of the devices and what the vulnerability level is for each service. We can dig down even further and see what the exact vulnerabilities are affecting each service. The services also have links to our access path analysis tool, which allows us to track the flow of a packet through the network. Finally, let's click on one of our options for patching and recalculate. This should give a new risk score value should you perform the suggested patch. In conclusion, the FireMon Risk Analyzer is a powerful tool to help assess risks within a security network, generate simulated attacks on network segments, evaluate recommended patches, and most importantly, improve your network's risk exposure. The asset list helps to identify which assets are exposed to vulnerabilities and also details how many of those vulnerabilities are found on each device. The vulnerabilities list displays vulnerabilities, of course, and how many times they are found within the network, categorized by level of an attacker's access. Then the risk map, which is based on the topology map, is where we can simulate attacks from any point in the network, helping to assess how an attack could propagate through the network. For more information about the Risk Analyzer module, see the Security Manager User's Guide at usercenter.firemon.com.